Morning. So how many of us are extremely tired? It's a smaller crowd, it seems, right now. Yeah, okay. It's last day of the conference. Everybody's tired. We're ready to go home. Who did not see the demo on Monday? Okay. You didn't see the demo on Monday? Okay. The keynote? Oh, you saw that. Okay. So we've seen that. I'll step through quickly on some of those pieces so we can see them. But let's first start off, why Apigility? Oops, I'm on the wrong. There we go. So why Apigility? Why are we doing APIs? Why is Zend even tackling this in the first place? The real answer is APIs are hard, right? Who here has done an API? Okay. How many of you actually got the content negotiation working? I know you have. Was it easy? No, right. It's hard. There's so many little details that you have to look at. First off, what response format are you going to use? Are you going to use XML? Are you going to use JSON? If you're using JSON, how are you doing hypermedia links? Do you even know what they are? There's a whole bunch of different things you have to think about so that you have a structured API that's predictable as people go and hit all the different endpoints. So that's the first problem. The next is, how are you going to report errors, right? Are you just going to dump, a PHP backtrace? Probably not. Are you going to have some sort of structure? Are you going to make up your own structure? Are you going to use the structure that exists? Which one do you use? It's hard. Then there's the HTTP negotiation. How much, how little? How do you report what's available? What happens if somebody does a put request and you don't allow it? How are you going to report that? These are all the little details, and as you start working with your API and having clients work with your API, and if you don't do them right, they start yelling at you. Then there's the content negotiation part. As you start doing new versions, what happens? As we send something, how do we know that what they sent is the right structure? You need to be able to make sure all of that works seamlessly for the end user. And then there's hypermedia linking. How many of you actually know what hypermedia linking is? Yeah, those two. Okay. So as somebody hits an endpoint, a service within your API, how do they know about the other pieces that are related to it? We need some way of linking to those. So how do I do that? Essentially, there's all these details and about 10 times more than these details that you need to be thinking about as you develop an API. And that's what Apigility is going to deliver for you. On top of that, we're going to let you create your API visually. So we were all here for the demo on Monday, or Tuesday rather. So we've seen this screen here. I'm actually going to show this again and go through some of the details because I only showed, the little bits and pieces that we actually were playing with. So excuse me for a moment while I switch my screens. I need to do displays. And of course it's over here. Oh, what happened? It's over on the other screen, so I'm trying to figure this out. There we go, mirror displays. And we'll go ahead and apply. Let's hope it doesn't crash the computer. And it did. Fantastic. I'll be right back. We tried this just before, and everything worked seamlessly. And of course, when you're up here, everything breaks. So I'm going to have to log into my computer and restart the presentation here. Hopefully, we'll pick up the mirrored screens in a moment. There we go. And we didn't get mirrored screens. And there we go. Are you guys seeing this? Are we guys, I'm not seeing it on the monitor. Should I try again? I'll try this again. Maybe I'll just do it on the big display here. Sorry for the technical issues, guys. This is weird. I haven't had this happen before. Not getting anything. Are you seeing anything? Should I just unplug? Sorry about that. We don't know what's going on up here. Evidently, the HDMI decided that it didn't like it. So when I switch to VGA, everything's good here. I'm going to skip the demo part because otherwise I'm going to miss, we'll run out of time for the rest of the stuff here. You guys all saw the demo. There's a whole bunch of stuff exposed in there. I'm going to show you what some of those pieces are as we go through this, but we can go through and look and change the routing. We can change the HTTP methods available. We saw all that yesterday. Other things you can do are going through and if you have a DB connected, you can specify a different database adapter, a different table, a different hydrator, which is how you're going to map the object, your PHP object, to the database and to the representation that you're going to throw back in the response. You can also go through and define the content negotiation rules that you want to use. What media types am I going to define, and all of those pieces. You can also define RPC services, which I didn't talk about during the demo yesterday. RPC services are simply, it's not RESTful necessarily. I just want to make some sort of call. It might be some sort of procedural call that I want to do in order to get some information. And so I can actually define those, and those are just going to be a route, and then it will create a controller with a method, and you can define the HTTP methods that you have in there, and also all the content negotiation things as well. So the admin lets you go through and do all of that stuff, and you get to version everything. Those are pieces that we cannot necessarily do easily on our own. So the admin does all of that stuff, and as we add more features to Apigility, things like the authentication piece, the input filtering piece, you'll see all of those come up in the dashboard as we start adding those over the next month or two here. So how do you get it? That's the thing I did not answer at all on Tuesday, so let's take a look at that. If you want to install it, you want to grab the ZF Apigility skeleton. How many of you were in my Composer talk yesterday? No, I saw a few of your faces. How many of you know what Composer is? A few more hands. I will put the slides up at some point. Otherwise, go to getcomposer.org. It's a dependency management solution. It also allows you to install projects, such as the skeleton, and all the dependencies that they have with them. So what you're seeing up here is we tell you go to Composer, get their installer, use it to create the project. We point you to the Composer repository we have for Zen Framework. And then once we do that, you're going to go in, you're going to enable a development mode so that you can get to the admin screen, copy in some stuff for the example app, and you're good to go. This development enable part is actually really important. This is a development tool only. Now, the APIs you create, you can do to production. But the admin will not follow you to production. You have to enable it, and the files that get created do not follow you to production because they're excluded from version control. So you can go and use the admin locally, do all your stuff, commit your code and everything, and now your staging server or your production server will be able to install it. The admin will not be there, which is fantastic. Once you have grabbed the Apigility skeleton, you can just fire it up. I often will use the PHP 5.4 built-in web server, and in which case I can just say -S 0:8080. Make sure you have these flags exactly right. I was talking with Rob Allen. He didn't realize you need a trailing slash after public when you use the -T flag. That's telling the web server where to resolve files that are static. And then the public index.php is the routing. So this is the bootstrap file for Zen Framework. And that has some rules so that it knows what to do in the case that the file already exists on the system so that the CLI web server will serve them. And now you can just browse to localhost 8080. You'll get that welcome screen that we saw. One note here. Currently, Apigility will only work at the root of a virtual host. So you have to do it at the root. This is a limitation due to how the asset management works. We hope to solve this before 1.0, but for right now, make sure you do it at the root of your host. We've talked a lot this week about how Apigility is an opinionated API builder and engine. So we're going to talk about those opinions now. The first one is that we prefer JSON over XML. XML is verbose, it's hard to read. It's actually, while there are great tools in PHP, it's actually still hard to parse because you have to write a parsing engine for every format that you expose. Additionally, if you want to create it, you then need to create a renderer for everyone that you expose. So it's very difficult. JSON, on the other hand, is really easy. On top of that, every single language out there pretty much understands JSON natively. So why don't we just use JSON and throw it over the wire? How many of you went to David I's keynote yesterday? I think it was awesome. One thing you heard on there over and over again was he wasn't talking about XML. He said JSON. All of these were using JSON REST APIs in order to communicate. So you should be doing the same. That's where everything's trending right now. So that's the first opinion we have. Now, when it comes to JSON, how many of you have written a JSON API? Okay, handful of you. How many of you structure it however the hell you want? That's pretty much all of us, right? How do you do hypermedia linking? How does somebody consuming your API know where to look for the relations in there? That's something else we wanted to tackle, and so we made an opinion here. There's a project called Hypermedia Application Language. Interestingly, it defines both JSON and XML representations, but we chose to do the JSON one, again, because we're choosing JSON here. Hypermedia Application Language gives us a consistent format with the hypermedia linking built in. It allows embedding resources, so if I have another resource that I can address, it will be embedded, and because it has the linking in there, I can go ahead and address it later if I want to. My client can say, oh, that's an embedded resource, let's go find out more information. So let's take a look at what that looks like. It does this by having a specific structure. The first thing is that there's that underscore links member up there. You always have a self-relational link that indicates, this is the canonical URL to this resource you just requested. You can also optionally have embedded resources. And so if there's an embedded object that you want to do that is addressable via the API, then we do it as an embedded object. And it too is a HAL resource. And so it has that underscore links in there. And it can have embedded resources as well, ad infinitum, which is great. When you do collections, they are embedded resources, and we have a collection. If we were doing like a list of speakers, we'd say speaker here, and it would be an array of these speaker resources. So we can do all of that. Otherwise, everything is just a property. And you can even do embedded objects that aren't resources. They're just, a structure of some sort. You can do those as well. It's very flexible, so I can expand on it, but I do have the structure I need, so I can have a generic client that can go and look at this and say, oh, it's HAL, I know what to do with this. So that was the first opinion we said. We're going to use this format in particular. The next one was how we wanted to report errors. Now, a lot of us will just report, oh, there's an error. We might use HTTP status codes, which is great. You want to do that. In fact, we still are doing that right here. But you want to do more details there, so you need to have some sort of structure. Again, we could have allowed you to just make up whatever structure you want, but we decided, hey, let's say API problem. This is an emerging standard. It's got an IETF draft out there, and people are voting on it. It's actually evolved since we started the project. I had to make some changes in the last week or two because some of the members changed. But you can do this. Just like HAL, there's also XML variants of this, but we chose to do the JSON one as well. You use the HTTP status code still. You can actually even report them in the payload so that they can take a look at that. The main things here are that we have a link to the problem type. So somebody can go and look that up and say, these are the conditions in which this problem happens, and they can understand what they may need to change in their request. There's a title that is specific to that problem type, and then a detail that's specific to the instance of the problem that you can put in there. You can also put in, you can put in a URL to the specific log entry, so if they want to, they can go in and get that information, or the developer in charge can say, hey, send me what you got. They can then take a look at that log information based on the URL. And there's a couple of other ones that are optional. On top of that, you can add anything else you want in there. So in this particular case, I put authentication URL, and I said API OAuth. So that's a custom piece in there. This is an expandable format, but it gives some specific structure so somebody can take a look at it. Their client can say, hey, it's an API problem response. Let's take a look and figure out what I need to report. So that was the second opinion. The next one is that people will and should version their APIs. And so we want to have versioning built in from the very beginning. Versioning allows the evolution of an API and allows you to have clients that are going to continue to work even when you evolve your API because they can target the previous version and nothing changes for them. Trying to see if there's anything else here. We are doing versioning in 3 different ways. The first is URL-based versioning. How many of you have used the Twitter API? Should be a handful of us, or Facebook. They do the versioning in the string, in the URL string. So you'll say v1, v2, that sort of thing. This is, a nice visual way of doing it. However, it means that you're technically, even though you're addressing the same resource, it's a different URL. And that gets a little bit hairy in terms of semantics and everything. There are a lot of people who feel that if it's the same resource, even if it's different versions, use the same URL. And so there's another type of versioning we do, which is media type versioning. So we can do this via the accept header and also the content type header. And we can specify a media type and have a version string in there. And so in this case, we can see v2 is in there. We generate a media type for you when you create an API, and you can actually go in and edit those. And so if you want to, you can have them per service. You can have it for the entire API. You can have it the same one for all of your APIs if you want. But you can create these media types right off the bat. We will then do the content negotiation for you. So in the demo on Tuesday, I showed this. I changed the version string in the accept header, and we were able to see that I got different responses as a result. So that was one aspect of it. So those are the 2 so far. The third one is that we version by namespaces in your code. So when we hit that little button that says create new version, it actually takes your code, clones it, and gives it another namespace so that we have that original code that continues to run, and then we can start making changes to the new version. That allows the old stuff to continue to run. Your clients are happy because it all looks the same, and then I can start altering the new version, and it's not going to affect the old versions. You can go back and edit those old versions. If you have security issues or maintenance issues you need to do on that, you can go back and edit it. It's all just PHP code. However, we don't expose the ability to change the configuration for how it's exposed via the API in the admin builder so that you're not breaking that information. But you can change the code if you need to. So those are the 3 ways that we do versioning. So those are the 3 opinions that we really stressed so far. There's other opinions we're going to be putting forth as we go forward with the development. But right now what we have seen up here is the, let's see if I can recap this really quickly. Version everything. We're using API problem for the error formats, and then HAL JSON for the normal response formats, and we're saying JSON is what we want to do. So now let's look at how we're making APIs easier. I said at the very beginning APIs are hard. So we've looked at what some of the opinions are, and you can start to see how those opinions might affect how you're able to develop an API, how we make it easier. But let's look at some of the details here. First one is the HTTP method negotiation. If I do a post to something that I have specified should only be a GET, what is the appropriate response here? Ben Ramsey does not get to answer this. So if I've said that only GET is allowed on this particular URL and somebody posts, what should the response be? Anybody here? I thought some of you said you'd done some APIs. Yeah, method not allowed 405. Awesome. So that's exactly what you'll see. We're taking care of all this for you in the background. So when you do those checkboxes and you hit save, there's configuration that happens. When it comes in, we will take a look and see, okay, we matched this route. So we know that we're hitting the session route. We've matched that one. Hey, look, there's a post here. Oh, well, that's not allowed. And so before we even invoke the code, we're intercepting this and we're returning a response saying it's not allowed. On top of that, we're setting the allow header here so that the client gets this back and says, oh, I got a not allowed response. And they can say, oh, look, I'm only supposed to do get. And so the client can then say, oh, I messed up. I need to change my response. Or, oh, that doesn't work. Why not? And then go back to the documentation. So that's one way we're making life easier. The next one is through accept and content type negotiation. So in the demo, I configured things to be application JSON. So what happens if I pass application XML there? What should I be getting back? Okay, again, HTTP geeks out there, what response code? If I have an unacceptable response here, I just gave you the header name. Okay. We're going to get a 406 not acceptable, and we'll report that, and you'll notice again we have API problem coming up here. The API problem is going to say, hey, this is not acceptable. It's going to report some details about that. This API can only deliver these particular media types. So that's the next way we make things easier. This stuff is really hard to get right. It's stuff that we forget about, and so people are posting, their forms to our API, and now we get a bunch of junk and garbage, and if we don't handle it correctly, we're potentially even messing up our data storage. So now we can intercept that ahead of time and say, that's not even allowed right off the bat. We're going to be doing one of the feature iterations here on one of the milestones we have up here is to create an input filter builder within the admin API. That's going to allow you to say, okay, for this field, this is how I want to filter it, and this is how I want to validate it. And you'll then be able to go through and set up a whole set of those rules and say, this is an input filter, and now I'm going to map this content type to this input filter, and it will go and validate it as it's coming in. If it doesn't validate, it's going to kick back a response before it ever hits your code. So this is the power of doing the content type negotiation. It's stuff that you guys, again, will not have to deal with, and this is why we built Apigility. The next piece that we do that's interesting is pagination. When we say, get to a collection, do we want to return everything? We're in an age of big data. If you've got 1 billion records, do you want to start streaming that? No. So we've built in pagination, and it's invoked automatically if you return a ZendPaginator instance from your API, from your resources or whatever. If I return a ZendPaginator instance, pagination is automatically turned on, and you can configure the size of that. You can even make it possible for the user to specify the page size as they go forward. So this is a really powerful feature. It allows us to do a whole lot of things for you. You don't even have to think about it. The collections are nicely formatted. They are individual resources. You can go and get any one of those individual resources as you go forward. And the pagination is going to show you, it actually shows you here, there's going to be relational links. And again, this is why we chose HAL. I can have these relational links. The self page is going to show us we're on page 1, but we'll also see first, last, and next links. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you'll see one for previous as well. So then you as a developer on the front end can go through and paginate through these and use those relational links that are exposed in there to figure out if there are any more results to do and if you want to keep paginating through there. The demo app I did for the ZendCon sessions, we saw I was going next and previous. Those were all built based on introspecting the response and the relational links to see if I had those next and previous links in there. If I did, I exposed a button for it. So I'm able to do that very easily because the HAL format gives me those relational links, and we are doing that by doing pagination. So those are a bunch of the things that make Apigility easier for you as a developer. Apigility lets you use whatever you want for code. We are generating some stubs for you that you can go in and then plug your code in there and start exposing your code as an API. You do not need to learn a framework. It is built on Zend Framework 2, but you do not need to learn a framework yourself. All you have to do is start using the tool and filling in some blanks, and everything will work. However, Zend Framework 2 is under the hood, which gives you a whole bunch of extension capabilities. It's using the MVC workflow already within Zend Framework 2, which gives you access to all the events and services that are already there. It is itself, oops, I hit the wrong button here. It is itself a collection of Zend Framework 2 modules. There's 12 of them up there right now. We're going to be adding more for authentication, input filtering, that sort of thing. ZF Apigility itself, the third one from the bottom, can actually be composed into an existing application, and we'll install all of its dependencies, and you can start exposing your Zend Framework applications assets as APIs right off the bat. Rob Ellen actually wrote a tutorial on that last night. I've retweeted it this morning. If you want more details, I'll give you a link. It works already seamlessly. You just add ZF Apigility and you can start exposing everything as APIs. Or you can start from scratch and use the application, the Apigility example, skeleton application, in order to start up a new project and take code that you've written elsewhere, just include it in there and start playing with it. Because we're using Zen Framework 2, you can extend your application quite a lot through events and services. So you have all the standard MVC events. We've also exposed a number of events within the resources, et cetera, within the REST module, within the content negotiation, et cetera, that you can go and tie into in order to do things. As an example, a couple of people have said, well, what if I don't want to use HAL? Well, that's what we're going to give you. However, because we have written this in a modular way, the content negotiation module is going to be able to allow you to map certain view model types to certain accept headers. So if you want to say, I do want to support XML in a particular format, I can map that media type to a particular view model and plug in my own renderer as another module, and it will just work. So you can do all of that stuff right now because Zen Framework 2 is under the hood. We have the standard events, and actually a lot of this stuff is happening as events. The fact that the content negotiation kicks back a response before hitting your code is because we're using the event system. So after routing happens, we check to see if the content type is something that we can actually do, and if not, we kick something back immediately, which streamlines your responses and means that the overall response time is going to be a lot faster for errors in particular. So we have a number of different recommendations for you as you start writing your applications. The first one is API first. Figure out what is the business value you are delivering and write that code. That's going to be just plain PHP code. It's going to be working with your persistence, working with other services. Maybe it's querying a search engine. There's all sorts of things you could be doing. From there, decide what you need to actually expose publicly. What are we going to need to expose up on the website? What do we need to expose for our partners, for our other organizations within our company? What do we need to expose for them? And then go ahead and implement the API and use Apigility to do that. You go in and say, okay, these are the resources I want to expose, and then you plug in your code into there, and now you have an API. To give you an example, the entire Apigility interface was written with this in mind. We did everything API first. Everything you see on screen has an API underneath it, which is why I was showing on Tuesday that sidebar showing the requests that were coming through. You could actually see that as I went and changed something, it was making an API request, and you could see I was doing patches, I was doing posts, I was doing GET requests. I was able to do all of those things because we had an API underneath. So we are actually eating our own dog food here. We're saying go API first, and we're actually doing it ourselves. The next thing we recommend is going mobile. And when I say that, I'm saying that you need to change how you're doing your front end. As web developers, we go into PHP, and the first thing we say is echo hello world, right? That's great. We can go and start doing HTML right off the bat. I'm saying that you may want to start moving away from that. Start writing the business value to your application, write that as code, expose it as data, and then expose it as an API, and start writing applications that will consume that API. Again, example here is the Apigility dashboard. We wrote it using AngularJS. It made it really easy for us to have these little models that all they're doing is making requests, and then we apply that request to the view. And the view is just HTML. And it's got a couple of different bindings in there, and as we apply it, everything updates for us. As a result of that, I'm able to have a responsive application. What you saw, I was doing part of the screen, and so it was showing it in a very linear way. That would actually work in your phone even, or your tablet. Or I can go onto my desktop here, open up the whole way, and actually have a slightly different interface because it's completely responsive. I'm able to do that because I'm separating out the front end entirely from how I'm doing things on the back end. I'm just delivering an API, And now I'm able to expose it any way I want. If I wanted to write a native Android application, a native iOS application, I could do so and just access those APIs. Ben over here had a great talk just before this, talking about doing API first, and this is one of the definite reasons for doing so. Now, a couple things that I forgot that I need to put this on here. The Apigility admin interface is using Bootstrap 3, which just came out about a month ago, jQuery, because Bootstrap uses jQuery for some of its interactions. We used AngularJS for most of the, it's our MVC framework for the client side. There's a tool called HyperAgent, which is a JavaScript library that natively understands HAL formats. And so we actually bundle these. We have minified versions of these that you can just include once into your HTML pages and start going. So we're actually giving you these tools up front and saying, hey, we know these ones work really well. This is a good way to start writing your applications. So we give you that, but if you want to do other things, start. So what's the future? We open source this, right? So the future is in your hands and our hands. I'm going to be honest here. We want to keep the tool as simple as possible. You'll hear me say no a lot when you ask for certain features. However, because of the modular architecture, you will be able to write your own modules and even share them with the community if you want to. So if you want to do other formats, feel free to write it, but write it as your own module and tell others about it. There are features that we know we're going to do, however. So a whole bunch of them. The first roadmap, the first milestone coming up, we're going to be heavily working on authentication and authorization. We already have some ideas on how to do this, but that's going to be one of the biggest pieces. That has been the single biggest question and most often asked question since I've been here is, what about authentication and authorization? Well, we're on it. So we're going to start working on that. If you have ideas, Enrico over here, raise your hand. He's the one to talk to. He's going to be spearheading that effort. We're going to do 2 or 3 different ways of doing it simply because there's so many different ways to do authentication. Most likely looking at OAuth 2 in combination with HTTP basic and digest authentication. I've already mentioned the input validation builder. That's another aspect of it. It's another part of the security story that we have going here. We're going to be doing that. It's going to be a visual tool that will create your Zend input filter definitions for you. We're going to write a client, HAL client in PHP. I've actually got this prototyped. We're not sure exactly where it's going to live, but we are going to have that so that you can be consuming APIs that you write. You can be consuming those from PHP as well if you want to. So we will have that. API documentation is another huge one. Once you have your API, you need to be able to communicate to others what's available, how to access it, what methods are available, that sort of thing. We actually have that all captured in the configuration. We're looking at a couple of different choices right now. We're going to choose one of them for how we're going to deliver API documentation by default. And then the other question I've had is, what about the performance aspect? How can we make this faster? APIs typically you want to have very quick. We're already addressing some of that through like content negotiation, HTTP negotiation, returning something as early as possible. However, when you actually have to go through the entire request in order to do things, how can we make that faster? And we're looking at some optimizations we can do to the ZF2 runtime. There's a lot of services we have enabled by default in the MVC that make no sense for APIs. So if you're only delivering an API in the system, we can actually give you a streamlined application there. So we're looking at how we might do that in the future here. Oops. Sorry, there we go. The other bit is, what do you want? There are some features people have brought up. I don't think we're going to be doing more representation capabilities, but that's one of the questions that's come up. How do I test my API? How can I do some integration testing with this? How can I, as I develop it, how can I take a look and see how to interact with it and see what happens when I throw something bad at it and that sort of thing. API testing will also be one of those things. But we want to hear from you. And we have a couple of mailing lists set up. I'll get into that in a moment here. We want to hear from you. What are the features that you feel would be very helpful so we know where to put our energies? We want this tool to be as simple as possible and as powerful as possible for you guys so that you can just create these awesome APIs and deliver awesome business value to your company and to your users. So how do you get involved? First off, apigility.org. We've got our flying elephant here. I really want a purple elephant with a green rocket on it next year as a plushie. Andy? We need a plushie of that. So we've got apigility.org. It's actually got a list of all sorts of resources there. We're going to be adding resources. As I see blog posts coming up, I'm going to start adding those so that you as users can go in and see how people are using Apigility and see what problems they're running into. Everything is open source. It's on the ZF Campus organization on GitHub. There's all these different repositories on there, and you can see all of the ones that we've listed. There's actually a few others, like apigility.org itself is open source at this point. So we can go through and add all of those things. If you need to report issues, or if you want to submit pull requests, go onto GitHub and do so. We've also set up a couple of Google groups, Apigility users and Apigility dev. These are the simple URLs for getting there. The users group is for support. So if you have questions on how to use things, if you have run into errors and you want to figure those out, post there. We've actually had a few questions come up already. I need to actually go and answer those now. And then we have the dev group. So if you are interested in where we're going and how you can help, the dev group is where you can go to ask those questions or volunteer help, etc. If you are an IRC geek, go on to Freenode IRC. We have #Apigility for support questions and #Apigility-dev for the development discussions. So quite often, we'll start a discussion on the mailing list, and maybe you need some clarifications or whatever. You can go in there and talk to somebody real time. Don't try this week because we're all here. So that's Apigility. It's going to be growing over time. We invite you guys to come and help us grow it and make it possible for us to make the best API engine and API builder out there. For feedback, you can tweet at me if you want to. Also go to apigility.org, and for talk feedback, 9097 on joined in is what you need to do. I'm sorry about the demo earlier. I worked flawlessly when we did the rehearsal earlier. I don't know what happened. If you want to see it in action, you want to see me step through the admin interface some more, come see me. I will be around for the rest of the day, in and out of meetings and all, but feel free. There will also be recording of this on the website, and if you missed the demo on Tuesday, we did actually do a recording of the keynote, and I think at the 30-minute and 45-second mark is where the demo begins. So, any questions out there? Question right here in the front.
Will you be supporting the other HTTP verbs such as options, trace, and...
So the question is, will we be supporting the other HTTP verbs such as options, trace, and etc.? We actually already support options. So that's already in there. Most likely we'll start adding some of the other ones in there. Trace is more interesting for debugging and all that stuff. I'm not sure what we would expose in there. But if there are verbs that make sense for us to do, we will. We tackled the ones that are most commonly used right now. Yeah. Other questions? Feel free. You mostly asked your questions yesterday, right, during the panel? Great. Okay, thanks. Enjoy the last day of the conference, and don't forget to hit the keynote at the end, especially if you want to win the prizes. You have to be there to win, right? So enjoy the day, and hope you had an excellent conference.